Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Obesity Treatment Analysis Advisory Group. This is our fourth meeting. As a reminder, the advisory group meetings are recorded and the recording is going to be published to the webpage for the advisory group. Like normal, please use the raise hand function or the chat to pose any questions or any comments that you have about the discussion or about anything else. So the purpose of today's meeting is to go over the obesity treatment analysis draft report that you guys were sent earlier this week. We currently have a meeting scheduled for July 24th. If we aren't able to complete our discussion, or if the group feels like we need to have a follow-up discussion and there are more questions or comments about the report, we'll use the July 24th meeting for that. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, well, if not, I will hand it over to Casey from Millman to go over the report. And if anyone has any questions or comments, use the raise hand function and the chat. Casey?
Thank you. So I'm going to briefly walk through the report in the format. I'm not going to share my screen because it is in a draft format, and so I'd prefer to not have that be posted just in case we do make changes so we don't have multiple versions. So all of you should have received the report on Monday, and this is there shouldn't be any surprises as far as the methodology goes since we discussed that. I can't remember which month that was. It feels like forever ago, but yeah. So it's been a minute once we finally got the data. So if you look at the report, you have your executive summary, which gives a summary of the results. It shows we did 3 different scenarios: the low, medium, and high. And so those are low, medium, and high assumption sets. So we use the low end of all of the assumptions for the low end and the high end assumptions for all of the assumptions that we were using to create the high end. They are not intended to be the entire universe of what could possibly happen. I mean, there's always outliers that could occur, right? And so you should think of them as like a reasonable range versus every possible scenario. But we are only showing the medium scenario through most of the exhibits just so that it's clear that that is our best estimate. So so when you do go to the results section, you will not see all the details that you see for the medium estimate for the other assumption sets. We also have a pie chart that shows, what the distribution is as far as the projected healthcare cost increase. And you'll see that the lion's share is the GLP-1s, and that's due to the low coverage and the high expected utilization of those services. Bariatric surgery, it has some coverage, which you see later in the report, but it also and it's low utilization, but it is a high cost service, and so that's where it comes in second. So when you go down to the background here, you'll see that we looked at obesity prevalence in 2 different ways. The first is looking at the claims data. So on the claims data, they can have a diagnosis coded of obesity, and you can see that the coded obesity and overweight with comorbidities within the claims data is around 10%. Based on published estimates, like from the CDC, we'd expect that number to be much higher. And so we used the CDC estimates adjusted for the difference between the Washington population and the nationwide population to come up with estimated obesity rate. So these would be the population of people that could be interested in the GLP-1 solution. So all of the other solutions had some coverage. And so this really only comes into play when thinking about the universe of people who would be interested in these services. So if you look at Exhibit 5, you can see what that coverage is. So the obesity screening had full coverage from all of the carriers, so that was not considered in the analysis and isn't really discussed. IBT, it depends on what type of service it was. So like the behavioral counseling is fully covered, but the physical activity and exercise related services and nutrition related services, there are some individuals without coverage. Bariatric procedures, they're covered for PEB and SEB, about half a large group. And then, it's very low coverage for small group and individual enrollees. The GLP-1s are, it's next to no coverage. Like you see 6% in the large group population and no coverage for the other populations. The question here was if they covered at least one GLP-1 for an obesity diagnosis. So they may cover GLP-1s for other diagnoses, but it was specifically for obesity. And you can see the survey questions that were asked in the appendix. Now, we did ask for other more qualitative information to try to get an understanding of what the coverage looks like, and if there's any limitations that they would have on it, and things of that nature. And so we summarized that and reported on it. And it is interesting that some of the information that they provided in those qualitative responses seems to suggest that they have coverage for GLP-1s for obesity, but because they told us that no one has coverage, we relied on the numerical responses, and so you will see some inconsistencies with some of that information within the survey responses. And so we relied on this table for the basis of our analysis. So to the effect that if they're understating how many people do already have this coverage, our results are overstated. But go ahead.
Sorry, Casey. I think Regina, did you have a question? Okay.
Yeah, I was just wondering if maybe the free-form responses that you had, that maybe they were responding that there was coverage thinking about GLP-1s for diabetes. Because I think isn't that where you talked about some of the things that are in place. And I think that's what kind of skews it, is like, do you cover GLP-1s? Well, not for obesity, but we do for diabetes. So that, I wonder if that might have contributed.
Yeah, and since diabetes is one of the conditions that are mostly covered, we did ask the question two different ways of, one, do you cover any GLP-1 for obesity? And the response was what you see in that exhibit. And then the second one was, do you cover any GLP-1 for diabetes? And the response was 100%. So they might not have covered all of the GLP-1s, but it was just to get an idea of, okay, like, we're specific, like in this instance, we're focusing on this obesity piece. And so that's where, to your point, it's difficult to understand like how they were interpreting the response or like the question to know whether they should be talking about obesity or these other conditions. So, so that's a great point. So yeah, you can read through some of their responses there. That, like I said, we tried to summarize that information, but it was not relied on for the most part, other than I would say more generally of just getting an understanding of the landscape versus like setting an assumption based on their responses. The financial evaluation was performed under two scenarios. So there's a baseline scenario where the proposed legislation mandating coverage does not go into effect. So it'd be if nothing changes in the forecasted years, then that is what we would expect to see as far as like the utilization of the services goes. The post-mandate world is if the proposed legislation mandated coverage of obesity treatments does go into effect. So, so same time of 28 and 29, but it's just under those two different scenarios of coverage and no coverage. And the financial evaluation, what really, walks through all of the results really, and steps through the utilization, how that would change, and the cost of the services and things of that nature. All of the exhibits, though, we tried to make them fairly consistent with their layout. So we show, at baseline, what we would expect, and then what the what the impact is as a number and what the impact is as a percentage. So in this, first we go through like the users of covered and non-covered services. So there are going to be people who are purchasing services outside of, oops, I'm sorry, I see a question.
Yeah,
Oh.
Greg.
Yeah, that's okay. I did have a question about the GLP-1 uptake forecast.
Mhm.
And are you going to go over that, or is now a good time?
No, go for it.
Okay. It appeared from the report that patients with diabetes might still be in the analysis. So I saw where if patients were getting a prescription for a GLP-1 for diabetes, they were excluded. But that was a claims-based prescription drug exclusion. I didn't see where patients with a diagnosis of diabetes would be excluded.
So under our analysis, we're assuming that if people have diabetes and are not currently receiving the drug as a result of their diabetes, they could be in the population who might use it for obesity.
That's
Go ahead.
That's not accurate. So patients with diabetes don't automatically go on GLP-1s for diabetes. They might be on metformin or any of the other many drugs for obesity. It's not until they fail on those treatments and they might be escalated up to a GLP-1. But most likely what we're seeing in markets is that if a patient has diabetes and they go on to a GLP-1, they go on to a diabetes GLP-1, which would be Ozempic or Mounjaro. They would not go on to the obesity one. And so several of the references that you've used here excluded diabetes patients from the analyses by a diagnosis code.
I'm sorry, say that last part again.
I was saying several of the references that you've used in your estimates here. So I'm thinking of like Gayosin and Gleason. They've all excluded diabetes from the population of analysis. And so, for example, your cost offset references, the GLP-1 effectiveness references, those are all in only patients with obesity. They've all excluded patients with diabetes.
So you're thinking that people with diabetes would not use obesity medication and should not be considered.
Yeah, if they would go on to a diabetes. Most payers would cover the diabetes, and you've seen in the references already. So patients with diabetes would go on to either Mounjaro or Ozempic rather than Wegovy and Zepbound.
Right.
So essentially what I'm saying is 2 points. One is the usual treatment pattern for patients with diabetes, regardless of if they have obesity, if they go on to a GLP-1, they will almost always go on to the diabetes version of the GLP-1. That's number one. Number two, all of the rest of the analysis in this report is contingent upon diabetes patients not being in the cohort. So your cost offset references and the adherence references, all of those studies have excluded patients with diabetes from the beginning. And so if you don't, so my point is, if you don't exclude patients with diabetes, then you would have to bring in all of the cost offset data for patients with diabetes and the adherence numbers.
Okay. I will, I mean, our clinical staff is the one who developed the methodology, especially around this component of it. So I'm going to have to bring that point back to them and have to
Okay.
have them respond to you separately, because I'm not
Because I
going
think, like, for
to
example,
pretend to know I know the
yeah,
like
no, I
clinically how
understood.
that progresses. Yeah.
But just so, for example, your reference number 46 is the Gleason 2024 paper. That paper excluded all patients with a diabetes diagnosis. And then Rodriguez et al., which is your reference number 45, that study completely separated out patients with diabetes and did a completely separate analysis from patients without diabetes on GLP-1s, which would be the obesity. And so my recommendation is to make sure any forecast that you do that would attribute the cost of an obesity program removes patients with diabetes.
Okay. Yeah, I'll bring that back to the clinical staff and have them weigh on that. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions at this point?
I have a question actually, and I may have missed this earlier but it gets to the modeling on the GLP-1 uptake. When you did up above talked through how you modeled the potential population eligible for the obesity GLP-1 or overweight GLP-1 modeled off CDC and whatnot, what's the percentage uptake you modeled? It almost looked like 100%. What did I miss? Like if it said like under each segment, individual market or whatever, like what would be eligible, what percentage would be eligible? Did you then model in the cost estimates like everybody there choosing a GLP-1, or did you have a percentage you thought might want to try it?
Yeah, so the percentages that we thought might try it is based on a Milliman study using data with people who have coverage and how many do that. And I believe the number, I'm trying to scroll through and find
I think it was
it.
12.7% was the uptake estimate.
Yes.
Awesome.
So
Thank
that's
you. Where
that's
is
for the
that? Was that
medium
you,
scenario.
Greg?
Okay.
Do you have it in front of you? Do you mind telling me where it is?
Yeah, I
Whoever
mean,
just
it
said
was,
that. I just.
it's on, well, I do have it highlighted in front of me.
It's okay.
Now.
I'll look for it. I thank you. That was the number I was trying to find, and I just couldn't, so I thought I'd ask.
So in page
It's
19
on page
is where we
10.
go through.
Thank you.
Yes, 12.10.
Tanya.
Thank you. Casey, I have some questions. First of all, just some overall questions of the exhibits 6 and 7, for example. Are these based on actual utilization from the APC data from the prior period, maybe trended forward? So for example, for the PEP and SEB populations, the numbers under bariatric surgery, is that an actual count of projected bariatric surgeries based on actual utilization for 2028?
Yes. So the
Okay.
baseline covered values are from APCD data.
Okay.
The non-covered estimates are based on research
Okay. So
and finding assumptions that way.
I have, I think, 2 follow-up questions. So I know that in the back you said premiums did not include UMP because there was no carrier response for UMP for the PEP and SEB populations. I do want to note that I think I do have significant concerns with UMP being left out of that, since the state's contribution towards healthcare is based on UMP and we are self-insured. So I can help provide those numbers because I think they are underestimated for the PEP and SEB populations. But that leads me to, is the data then with utilization here inclusive of UMP or just the fully insured carriers?
The data is inclusive.
Okay. So I'm noticing some significant differences in PEB versus SEB in one specific category where everywhere else seems to be similarly aligned as we would expect given the size of the two populations, but the non-GLP-1 obesity medications is significantly different for the subpopulation, and I'm unsure why that would be. Specifically, like table or exhibit 6 in the impact of covered, I wouldn't expect there to be such a significant difference for the subpopulation.
Norman, do you know the details behind that particular number?
Yeah,
I might have.
give me a second.
It might have to be something that we go back to and answer. I don't know that specific detail.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just when you look at the percentages kind of at the bottom of 10 leading into 11, it's very starkly different, and I wouldn't expect that given the population differences.
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat the table and the...
Yeah, it's exhibit 6, and it's really the non-GLP-1 medications that is significantly higher for SEB in both exhibit 6 and 7.
Got it.
Yeah, and given the numbers on all the other categories being very similar, that one just stood out to me.
Yeah, we might have to dig into that one a little bit offline.
Okay,
But thank you.
and then if you're open to it, I'd be happy to work with you to get you the UMP premiums to add them in there because I think they are underrepresented, only including fully insured.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Heather, anything from your standpoint on that table?
No, you covered everything that I had questions about as well.
Okay, I don't see any more hands, so I'll continue on. The next section is the cost per service. Here, we're not estimating any changes as a result of the mandate. There might be some changes as a result of the service mix. So, for example, IBT is rolled up between the behavioral counseling, nutrition services, and physical activity. And as you saw in that earlier table, the coverage in some of those services differs by line of business. And so it might look like it's changing, but it's really that it's just the mix of services that we think people would be using once they receive that coverage that is driving any change that is seen there. I see a question.
Hi there. I just wanted to make sure I understood. When you say that average cost per service remains unchanged, you're talking about drugs, bariatric surgery, and the IBTs. That's what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm confused because you say in the report, it says a couple of different places that we assume the average cost per service remains unchanged. But then later on, you talk about how the difference in drug costs will change about like so I think I calculated at like $1,100 between 2028 and 2029. That's just for the GLP-1s. So I'm trying to figure out how we're saying the cost of services don't change, but then there's different numbers and values that you're assigning for GLPs in 2028 and 2029, and they're different.
So the values. So when we say that they're remaining unchanged, it's as a result of the mandate. So we're not thinking that someone's going to, because of the mandate, bariatric surgery is going to go up 20% in cost. So we're thinking that the cost of a service is going to remain unchanged. So the cost of one script will remain unchanged, regardless of whether it's becomes covered or not, or whether the mandate goes into place. So that's the piece that when we say that, or when I'm saying that.
And I guess I don't follow that logic because like when does the cost of a procedure or a drug stay the same over 2 years? Like that doesn't make sense.
Well,
I don't think they're going to drastically go up or down, but like they go up.
Right. So we're assuming medical trend. So we're assuming that there's going to be trend involved, but that's going to happen regardless of whether or not the mandate goes into effect. So what we're saying is that they're not going to change the cost of these services as a result of the mandate to say double the cost of something or increase the cost by 10%. So we're not saying that trend is going to happen regardless of whether or not the mandate goes into effect. So the baseline and the post mandate cost per service is the same. The other difference that you highlighted, so like I said, when you see the IBT, because the service mix underneath that changes, that's where it'll look like there's a change. With the drugs, it looks like there's a change because I think the number that you're probably thinking about is like an average for the user, and that's over the course of a year. And for the GLP-1s, we have a phase-in period. And so you're going to have people who are using it for 12 months, 11 months, 9 months, like they're coming in throughout the year. And so they're not going to have the same scripts per user in a given year for the first year versus like a second year once they hit the steady state. So that's where you'll see some of that, that the differences that it's like, yes, there is a difference there, but it's not because we're thinking, oh, GLP-1s are going to get 50% more expensive as a result of a mandate. Does that make sense?
Well, and I sort of, but again, because like there's something in there where, and I just found the number, like on page 12, you talk about there's like a $3,900 annual cost in 2028 and a $55,060 cost in 2029. So that's the difference of like $1,100 from year to year. So I guess that's where I'm just trying, it confuses me when we say the cost of services aren't going to change, but then there's numbers in there showing the GLP-1s, like they're not going up dramatically, but they are going up.
I'm sorry, what page were you on?
Page 12.
Yeah, I could see where that wording is confusing, and we can put in more explanation around that because
Okay.
it's really the scripts per user that's changing. It's not the cost of the service that we think is changing, and that's because of that ramp up of not everybody running out on 1/1 to get the script filled.
Oh, okay.
But more people who might be continuing to use, like in 2028 you're going to have that phase in, but in 2029 you're seeing some people who are continuing the drug and then some people who are brand new to it, and so you'll see a higher script count per person as well as the trend from 28 to 29. But I could see how that the language is confusing, and we can certainly try and tighten that up.
Yeah, Casey, I think it'd be helpful to just clarify that in the updated draft.
Since we're on this topic, I feel compelled to bring up my recommendation from the beginning for the price of the GLP-1s was not to assume of what was it, 5% increase annually. Since the drugs have been on the market, they have gone down, not up in price with regard to net pricing. And so with competition coming on the orals and then with other companies and their GLP-1s coming out and then the triple G coming out, all of that competition is, and what the evidence shows is that the net prices are going down year over year, not going up. And so our recommendation was to have like a low end of, like if you're doing the low, medium, high, low being prices going down slightly over time, the medium being consistent pricing, and then the high being the sort of the 5% increase year over year or whatever. But the problem with that is that, as you all know, the net prices aren't transparent and they're not published, so it's hard to have a reference to reference that. So I won't raise it as a big issue because I understand that you all don't have references that would support that. But just the reality is that for the GLP-1s, the net prices have come down since launch.
Right, and so we have assumed 450, 600, and 750, and
Yeah.
those remain the same in 28 and 29.
Okay, you aren't doing a medical trend increase for those?
No.
Oh, okay. Oh, you should point that out because I felt like when I was reading the report that there was an assumption that the prices in 2029 would be slightly higher. I may have misread that though.
Okay, no, that's helpful. I'll go back and read the methodology section, but we definitely held the 28 and 29 lower, and it's based on Milliman research of
Okay.
where they're thinking that things might be headed and what we're seeing, what the ranges are, and things like that. But to your point,
Yeah.
like we don't have a good published estimate that we can come
Right.
out with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's see. So I'm like scrolling around here, so I'm trying to walk through. So got to the cost per service. So then there's the enrollee cost share and self-pay impact. So I mean, to the point earlier, we do estimate how many people would be using, especially GLP-1s and some of these. There's some IBT services that we think might be used outside of insurance, and so that's what the non-covered services PMPMs are that are included there. And post-mandate, we're assuming that all of those non-covered services, which are being paid in full, so there isn't cost sharing, it's not like a copay or a co-insurance on those, they're being paid in full. Those would become covered services. And so you'll see the post-mandate covered service number goes up, but it doesn't go up as high in most cases as the non-covered service line. And so there's usually some savings there. There is one instance where because of the increase in use based on due to the utilization or the new coverage, there's utilization is also going up. So they're paying a portion of the drugs, but the utilization of those drugs goes up so much that eats away the non-covered service piece. So it looks like the cost sharing is going up, but it's because there are so many more users, and that happens for the small group in 2029. But for all the others, you see there's two pieces that are going on there. There are newly covered, there are people who are covered users at baseline and they continue to use, and then there's the people who are newly covered users who were not receiving services before, and you have those co-insurances and co-payments going into the covered service line. And then you also have the people who were paying 100% of it out of pocket and are now paying just a portion as it now becomes a part of their insurance. Does anyone have any questions about the enrollee out of pocket exhibits?
I just have a question. Is there a reason, I understand your explanation of the small group, why it looks different than everybody else. Is there a reason why that wouldn't have also occurred with the individual folks? Because they had really low coverage as well.
The the percentage that is being paid by the insurer for small group for these services based on the APCD data is lower than in the individual data.
Okay. Cool.
And so it could be a mix of it could be the plan designs themselves, or it could be a mix of the people and what services that they're using, what plan designs those people have. But we're relying on the data for those pieces. Okay, so the next section, we get to the cost offsets, and the methodology for developing the cost offsets is what we had discussed earlier on our prior call. So we're looking at the percentage of users who achieve at least 5% weight loss, and we are assuming a portion of their savings would occur in the same year that they're receiving the service. So in reality, that timing might be different, but for the purposes of our analysis, we're showing it within the same year. The obesity medications, there is a phase-in period. So we are assuming a uniform distribution of people who start the drugs throughout the year. And then for the effectiveness component, someone who started in December, we're not going to say they're going to have the same effectiveness as someone who started in January. So we're taking the the effectiveness numbers, and we're assuming those, throughout the year. So the number, if you'll see it in the methodology, looks much higher than it does in year one. And the year one to year two change is very different. And it's because more people have been on it longer, because you have the people who are on it for for the first year of 2028, and then they continue to use it into 2029. So you don't have as many people who are just on it for 1 month or 2 months. You have people who are on it long enough to start recognizing some of the effectiveness. The final table really ties everything together, showing the premium and enrollee cost sharing impact, and it is netting out the cost offsets. The premium is based on the claims within the APCD, and we're assuming that there's I think it's a 15% administrative ratio across all lines of business, and that's based on published resources to come up with the premium change assumptions or estimates.
Gregory?
Yeah, thank you. For the cost offset data, I have a lot of questions for the assumptions, which in exhibits 14, 15, and 16. So for the first one, exhibit 14, it looks like you've truncated the potential effectiveness at 10% weight loss and applied the average expected cost offset for people who lose 10% of their weight. And that was taken from the Thorpe paper. But Thorpe paper includes higher cost offsets for people who lose 15% weight, 20% weight, and 25% weight. For example, the point estimate for people who lose 25% of their weight was almost $3,000. But it looks like in this study, you've truncated the high end of the potential effectiveness at 10% and applied the lower cost offset for everybody. That completely biases the result in a much, much lower cost offset than anyone would expect from the references that you've provided.
Yeah, and this is, again, our clinical staff developed the effectiveness assumptions and poured through the research to determine what percentage of people would hit those 5% and 10% weight loss thresholds. I could certainly go back to them and see if
but hold on, because you guys are using the right references. I mean, your own reference number 44, which I believe is the Gassoyen paper, that was a real world evidence study. They found, and they stratified by early discontinuation and late discontinuation and no discontinuation. They found 3 to 4 times higher rates than what you have in here. So for example, if we take the cohort that your reference shows for early discontinuation, these would be people who were on GLP-1s for just a little bit of time. They saw 35% of those early discontinuers reach at least 5% weight loss, but you're showing 15%. And then this study found almost 18% received 10% weight loss, 9% at 15%, and 4% at 20%. Those are only the early discontinuers. If you look at the people who did not discontinue, 76% of that real world evidence population experienced at least 5% weight loss, yet you have 15%. So I'm very concerned about exhibit 15 and where those estimates came from, because they're not even consistent with the real world evidence that you're referencing, which is reference number 44.
Right. So I know that some of the things that they considered when developing the effectiveness rates is also how long people are keeping that weight off. So it's not as simple as quoting reference 44. As you can see, they relied on 40 through 47. And I can
Okay.
certainly bring this point up with the clinical team and
Yeah. Well, I
have
mean,
them get back to you on that.
I'd be concerned are there references that they're using for the percent of people who regain their weight back? Is that what you're saying? Like if they're discontinuing and then regaining weight back? Because there are references for that I'm not seeing in here.
Again, so the references 40 through 47, I personally did not develop the effectiveness by intervention. That was done by our clinical staff. And so I can bring that concern up with them.
Okay.
But I do know that they're not considering just, as a single study that's showing, this was the results of that study when
Yeah.
other studies are showing that people are, gaining
Well,
weight. And so I know
I
that
understand what
they're,
you're saying, but I'm just saying all of the studies show numbers higher than what your clinical team is coming back with, except for like 2 studies. And those 2 studies were from like 2016 that only studied liraglutide. And so I guess there are a couple of things here. The reality is for an obesity program that would be established in the state of Washington that were to go into effect, the majority of people who will be going on to GLP-1s for obesity will be taking either tirzepatide or semaglutide. Those No one's going to be taking liraglutide. I mean, that's a much older, much less effective product. Maybe some will, but the lion's share of people going on to GLP-1s for obesity are going on to the more expensive, but much more effective GLP-1s. And so those studies by Gayeson and Gleason, those are primarily studying semaglutide and tirzepatide, and they're showing effectiveness rates that are, yeah, slightly lower than what the clinical trials have shown, the SURMOUNT study, but not much lower. And if you stratify by discontinuation early and late, just like your reference does, you get a much more um, a much more evidence-based estimate for what the real world observations are showing. I'm worried that the clinical team that you're referring to is using non-research to come up with effectiveness estimates that are, I can't even figure out where they came from because there is no methodology that's shown here and no references that would point to people having at least 5% weight loss in the 15% range. No study of semaglutide and tirzepatide has shown that from a real world evidence perspective. So that's a concern. The effectiveness estimates in Exhibit 15 are a concern. And if you turn to Exhibit 16, which is the next year, they're like halved. And there is no methodology or references that show like why would you expect them to be halved? And then the third thing, I'll just go back to Exhibit 14, which is it is a misapplication of the Thorpe paper that you've even reference number 39 is in the text right above Exhibit 14. That is the Thorpe paper. And the numbers 670 and 1286 came exactly from the first 2 columns in the Thorpe paper. But the Thorpe paper has many more columns for 15% weight loss, 20% weight loss, and 25% weight loss. And that reference shows that as you increase your weight loss, the cost offsets also increase. But what you've done here is you've taken a cost offset for people who only lose 10% weight loss, and you're applying that cost offset for everybody above 10%, which is factually incorrect. I mean, there is no rationale for that. I don't understand why you're not including the higher cost offsets. It's almost like it's purposefully capping the potential cost offset.
So I think it makes sense to have Casey go back to the clinical team to get more details around how they came up with the estimates and also just the general methodology. And then we can send a follow-up email to everyone, in the advisory group for their awareness. And also if we do decide we need to continue this conversation on July 24th, we can also follow up and have a discussion on that as well.
Okay. I'm
Does that
also
make-
happy if you
Okay.
would like and it's helpful. I'm happy to write up my critique and share it with the full group too. versus
Yeah, I
just
think
the verbal?
I think that works as well. Yeah, I think that would be helpful, just so everyone is like can see it written what exactly you're asking.
Sure.
And then we can have Casey follow up and we can send the response to everyone.
That sounds good. Thank you. I think the last section that we had was the defrayal, and I feel like that's more of a state consideration. And so we estimated the cost of defraying this benefit to be within that range, or for 28 and 29 to be the numbers presented. Excuse me. Oh, I see a question. Go ahead.
Hi there. Sorry, I just have a question on the defrayal. I just want to make sure I understand. When we're looking at the overall cost of like what this mandate would cost, you have premium changes and you have premium changes, and then you also the defrayal would be an additional expense, right?
Right. So under the Affordable Care Act, the benefits in excess of EHBs would need to be paid for by the state. And so this would be the component that would need to be paid for by the state.
Okay.
But we did not, Norman, correct me if I'm wrong here, we did not include the administrative component for that because they would be paying for the benefit, not for the administration, any administration load that was put on it.
Yep.
And that was in discussion with Rocky, the actuary. I don't know if Rocky's on the call.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. The incurred claim members still pay their cost share, but what would have been incurred by the health plan is defrayed to the state.
But that would be on top of the premium increase that we're estimating, right?
Well, there would be no, if it's defrayed, then there is no premium for this part, for this actual benefit. Because the entire cost is paid by the state and the member. So that they don't get paid twice, right? So the health plan only gets premium for the benefit if they pay for the incurred claim. But since the incurred claim is being paid by the state, the premium doesn't go up for the cost of the benefit that's being defrayed.
Okay, so you don't add the defrayal number to the premium number.
Correct.
Okay.
But it is different than the premium number because of the cost of or like the administration fees on that.
Okay.
So that's why those numbers don't match. Like you need something else more confusing in here, right?
I want to say thanks for running these numbers. I was part of the team that advocated for this study. And we kind of talked about next steps or whatever. I want to say that I'm a little concerned about what's been flagged about the cost savings maybe not being accurate or the modeling there, because we are faced with this being the number the legislature would have to contemplate and pay for any level. And the thing I'll say to you all that stands out to me is we dramatically undercover obesity treatment in the state. And I still am confounded on how this isn't discrimination, but that's a discussion for another day. And I know we've heavily centered on GLP-1s, but it's the totality of treatments that are not adequately covered. So I just want to say that on the record. And that is why that number is so large. And I want to say this is meaningful and this is real people. And we need to remember that these are life-changing medicines at times or interventions we've seen, but that number is huge. I just want to say that out loud. It's a reality. And so, I'm happy to work offline, or if we need to come back on the 24th, but part of, and this isn't everybody's job on this call, but like the reality is because the state has to pay for this post ACA, part of the equation is the cost savings potentially. And so I just want to flag that I hope we can do some more work on that and the assumptions and that piece, because if that number is sitting low, it makes the viability of coverage that much harder. And so it sounds like we have a couple of weeks here. And I just want to say that's an area I think, having gone through all this, that needs a little bit of like dialing in and honing in on.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
I was gonna, are you finished presenting just so we can ask some general questions, or should we wait? Are you still, do you still need to go through
Yeah,
the
no.
rest?
I mean, the methodology and assumptions changed to the extent that the discussions that we had in the prior meeting. So we've already walked through the methodology section, and then the rest is really, you have the survey back there. So yeah, I think we can open it up to general questions. Go for it.
Okay, so I just have a question about my interpretation of the report is that on page 6 there's a discussion about obtaining more favorable rebates, and what I took from the report was that it sounded like these additional rebates would offset the additional costs for this mandate. Is that a correct read of what's in this report?
So when we're discussing rebates, we're talking about the drug rebates, and
Right.
so that is to reduce the cost of each drug.
Right.
So so they're not the drugs will still cost money, but it's going to be less than like we took the rebates into consideration, and then based on the feedback that we got in our last meeting, we changed the definition of who could become covered from just being obese to those being overweight with comorbidities, because that would increase that rebate potential. And so the cost of the drugs that are reflected here are reflective of those rebates already. So it's not going to offset the entire. It just
Okay.
reduces the cost per script. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's because again, I'm looking at the last sentence of the executive summary says, while some healthcare savings are expected, they're not projected to fully offset the added cost of coverage in the first 2 years. So that makes me think that yes, costs are going to go up, but rebates are going to take care of a lot of those increased costs. And I was just trying to figure out, like, where did all the rebate discussion or considerations come in? Because I didn't see any questions to the carriers about rebates. Um, I'm just trying to figure out where all that came from.
So the drug costs that are paid by that's a good way.
The manufacturers.
Norman just go ahead, Norman. Sorry, Norman just responded. I think I'm misunderstanding your question. Go ahead, Norman.
Hi, yeah. Well, at the end of the executive summary where we say healthcare savings, we're talking about what Gregory was just talking about, the weight loss savings, and
Okay.
not rebate savings for prescription drugs.
Okay. Because I guess I thought the purpose of this analysis was to try to figure out, okay, if the state mandated coverage of obesity therapies, all 3 of the different categories, what would be the cost to insurers for that mandate? And so I guess that last sentence just confused me, because it is going to cost a lot of money. There will be cost offsets. People will be healthier. People will be less obese, have less. I get all of that, but I just was wondering, like, you look at the last sentence and you're like, wait, I don't understand. Is this going to cost money or not?
Yes,
I'll
it
actually
will.
clarify in working on it. It's the cost to the state that drove the conversation because of PEBSEB, but also that post ACA. So there are costs to the, increased admin costs or whatever, but there's an awareness that the state has to cover the benefit costs. So I would say the top driver of trying to understand is like what the state would need to pay if the mandate went into effect.
Okay. So that would just be the defrayal thing?
Yeah, the deferral number is a big number we've been looking for. That and Milliman, I think you've been involved, so I don't want to speak for you, but we've done this on a couple benefits, right, over the last couple years, like IVF and hearing aids, maybe. And it's just this thing we can do now to get a handle on what it might cost because the state has to do the defrayal. This is the way we get this information, is through asking OIC to work with a partner to model it.
There's also the part about what it's going to cost consumers too, is when if it became an EHV, right? So that is a big part, but
Right.
it's not the whole story. We're trying to consider all of the whoever's funding it, right? I think that's a big reason why weight loss hasn't been covered more broadly already. So that's why we have both components in the analysis.
I'm just wondering though, with this report, you did look at what it would cost folks other than PEB and SEB, large, small, and individual group. And I know, like in the report, it said like use the medium PM or the medium total costs, because that was a good place in the middle of this huge range that we could possibly see. And when you look at Exhibit 1 and you use the medium, you look at the medium columns for 2028 and 2029, it looks like the total cost for this mandate is about $258 million in 2028 and $403 million in 2029. But then you have an offset of 76.7 million in 2028 for the defrayal and 113 million in 2029 for the defrayal. But that still leaves a pretty significant cost that the private market is going to have to pay. Is that accurate?
So as discussed earlier, so the defrayal and the individual and small group, like, so if with defrayal, like these benefits would not end up going into the premium. So the premium impact would be zero at that point. And then it would be, the cost would be the defrayal, and that would be to the state. Now, if they go into premium, that's the numbers that you see in Exhibit 1. And there's a couple of differences there. We've got the administrative fees, and then we're also, and Norman, keep me honest, we're not including the savings associated in the defrayal piece. Is that correct, Norman?
I think so.
And the reason for that is it would be difficult to say like, oh, it's because this benefit, or like these expenses didn't occur because the state was paying for it. So it's hard to prove a negative, a thing that never happened, right? And say like, oh, we shouldn't have to pay this much because of that. And so those numbers that you see in the defrayal are going to be different than if you add up the premium impact for individual and small group for those reasons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll need to read it again after you guys have clarified the defrayal thing, because I was like, okay, wait, isn't that more expense? So I'll reread it again, and if I have questions, I'll submit those.
Okay, thank you. Gregory?
Yeah, I just need to reiterate my concern here because I do think these numbers are way off. And I think it's essential to, whatever the numbers are, that they are as accurate as possible in your forecasting. And I do want to reiterate that diabetes is a covered indication. The survey responded in that way. All of the GLP-1s for diabetes are already covered. And I feel like the way that you've set this up is that you would start attributing that use to the obesity program, which is not correct. Even the Medicare Bridge program excludes people with diabetes because diabetes is a covered indication. And then the other, so that overestimates the incremental size of the new GLP-1 users that the cost would be attributed to. And then the rest of my concerns significantly underestimate the cost offsets and the effectiveness because number one, you've truncated the cost offset at preventing anybody from having a cost offset that would be more than somebody who reaches 10% weight loss. And we know with these modern drugs that more than 10% weight loss is happening, and that's attributed with cost savings that is completely excluded from this study so far. The effectiveness measures are, it looks like, based on liraglutide. And it looks like the studies that show higher effectiveness that are even being referenced weren't used. And then finally, one thing I did not raise earlier that I also think might be why the clinical team is pushing down the effectiveness so much is that the adherence or persistence measures were taken from the Prime Therapeutics study, which is Gleason et al., that was during the period of time when semaglutide and tirzepatide were in shortage. People were not able to get their refills because of shortage. They repeated that study. It was released last year, and the persistence numbers doubled. Yet that study was not included as a reference here. So it leads me to believe that the team is using that older reference when the products were in shortage and is not using Prime Therapeutics repeated the analysis. It's the same authors. And they actually show in the table if you're a new user in 2021 or 2022 what your persistence was, and then they have several other columns in that report. If you're a new user that started in 2023 or 2024, which by the way in 2023 there was still some shortage, the numbers doubled. And so, but that's not being reflected here. So I do think it's important for us to circle back. Like I said, I'm happy to type all of this up and send it not just to the Milliman and OIC team, but everybody on this call. And I do think we need to relook at these and just make sure that the right assumptions are going into the analysis.
Yes, and if you have a reference too of a study that you didn't see included there that you think
Yes.
We should consider, please
Okay.
please forward it our way.
I will. Thanks.
Any other questions I can answer at this point? Okay, look forward to all of your questions.
Yeah, so based on our discussion today, I think it makes sense to have the July 24th meeting. In between now and then, if everyone can send their questions over email, like write your questions out, send them to the group, or you can also just send them to OIC, and we'll try to get responses out either over email or we'll address them in that July 24th meeting.
Is there a specific email we should send it to?
You can send it to my email. I can put it in the chat. Or you can just respond to the last advisory group meeting as last advisory group email that I sent as well with that. Does anyone have any questions about that or anything else?
Are you guys able to share a little bit of insight into where the rebate information was pulled from and where those estimates of values were derived from?
What the drug rebates? Or
Yeah,
the savings?
the drug rebates.
No. Rebate information is generally pretty proprietary. So
Yeah.
the ranges that we assumed for the cost of the drugs was based on internal research and where we think the market is going to be headed, including what we've seen as average rebates or typical rebates, I'd say.
Okay.
So it's not based on a source that you can point
And you're
to.
asking about like the 3 net prices. Is that right?
That and again, I think there was let me look and see.
Yeah. I mean, I looked at those and I thought that they were the higher one was in the $700 range, which was high, but I understand like SSR Health has published some sort of their estimates of net price, and I felt like the prices that the Milliman team here used were generally in line with that, with what SSR Health has produced, and I think IQVIA. I mean, I look at that and I think they're high because I see real-time information on where rebates are, but those aren't published. So I think that what's in there is is probably the best you can do based on the research that's out there.
And I think the sentence that I keep going to on page 6 that I'm like, I just want to understand where the statement is, where the support for the statement is. So it says, while it's on page 6, while the number of individuals using GLP-1s will increase, this dynamic will be more than offset by the additional rebates.
Oh, yeah.
So that I'm just trying to understand, like, so you're saying like, yes, there's going to be more people using it, but the rebates are going to be so large that it's going to be completely offset. And I'm trying to figure out
I see.
where's that coming from?
Right. So the dynamic that we're trying to explain there, which we did poorly, is that you can have the technically, as the mandate is written, it's for obesity coverage. And so because then we would not be covering GLP-1s for all of the FDA approved conditions, which includes overweight with comorbidities, they might not get that rebate potential that's out there. So the rebates wouldn't be as low. So say if you kept it at obesity, the drug would be $1,000. But if you expanded the definition to obese or overweight with comorbidity, the drug goes down to 500. So the cost per script would be different if you expand it. So what we're trying to say there, and albeit poorly, is that there will be an increase in the number of people who take it because now you're expanding that population to overweight with comorbidities, but with the savings that you're going to get in the difference in the rebates, it's going to offset. It will offset that to make it more advantageous to just expand the definition of who's covered. So it's not going to.
But we have data to show that rebate is going to offset all the 12.7% more people that are using the drug.
No,
it's not
Okay.
offsetting the entire cost of the drug. It's just if you have 10 people who are obese and they're using it at $1,000 and the manufacturer is going to drop it to 500 if you cover it for overweight with comorbidities, and that's one extra person, you're going to be saving $500 on those first 10, but you're going to be paying an extra 500 for the one extra person.
Right.
And so that's where we're saying it's going to offset. So it's the marginal users from extending that definition.
Okay.
And we'll definitely
and I misinterpreted
that
thinking,
section. Yeah.
Okay. And I misinterpreted it thinking that the rebates were going to offset the cost of everything. And I was like, wow.
Yeah, no.
There are a lot of rebates out there.
There are a lot of rebates out there, but I don't know if there's that much.
No. Yeah, we'll definitely. If there's other sections in the report that are confusing like that. We didn't want to provide like a Word version for people to wordsmith, because then once you merge them all together, like the version breaks, because it's like everybody had something that was in contrast to what somebody else thought should have happened, and then it just breaks the machine, So, but if there's something like that where it's like, what do you mean here? That's certainly something that we can edit that for clarity, because that I can see where it reads that way. So thank you.
Are there any more questions? Okay, so I'll send a follow-up email I'll give you guys a deadline for when to submit your questions. I'm thinking probably by July 17th, so that Milliman has enough time to kind of go back to the clinical team or anyone else they might need to talk to in preparation for our July 24th meeting. But I'll send a follow-up email with that information, and I will end this meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for all the work.
you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.